Land use changes around Lake Jackson have neighbors there wondering and worrying about the impacts on the environment and the look of their community.
On a humid Tuesday morning, thousands of docks across northern Florida woke up hanging over vast, empty basins of cracked mud. Overnight, 4 billion gallons of water vanished into the earth without a sound. But as millions of eyes stared into the black void of a giant sinkhole, a far more terrifying reality was taking shape beneath their feet. Because water doesn't simply disappear, it moves, and where it went was about to trigger an unprecedented crisis. The breach, if it didn't drain where it was supposed to. You are walking out to your backyard dock at 6 in the morning, holding a steaming cup of coffee, expecting to see the sunrise reflecting off 4,000 acres of calm glass-like water. Instead, you step up to the wooden railing and stare down into a terrifying abyss. The water is gone, all of it. In its place is a silent, cavernous landscape of slick gray mud, dying vegetation, stranded speedboats resting sideways on their hulls, and thousands of thrashing fish gasping in dwindling puddles. Where billions of gallons of water once sat, there is now only a vast, weeping crater. At the center of this sudden wasteland lies a gaping, pitch-black hole, swirling like a drain at the bottom of a massive porcelain bathtub. The sheer speed of the collapse is staggering. Millions of tons of fluid, drawn down by gravity, rushing downward into the dark limestone throat of the earth. Under normal historical conditions, this massive volume of water quietly filters down into the deep, porous chambers of the underground Floridan aquifer, recharging the ancient freshwater reservoir that sits miles beneath the peninsula. It is an invisible, self-contained geological pressure release valve. What happens when that natural plumbing system suffers a catastrophic structural failure? What if the water doesn't go where it's supposed to? To understand the nightmare scenario that began unfolding in the hours following the collapse, you have to understand the fragile architecture beneath Florida's soil. The entire region rests upon a subterranean labyrinth of honeycombed limestone, a sprawling system of hollowed-out caves, underground rivers, and pressure-loaded pockets. When 4 billion gallons of surface water suddenly drain in a matter of hours, that incredible mass does not simply evaporate into a void. It exerts immense, concentrated hydraulic pressure as it forces its way through tight, dark channels. On this particular night, the primary underground arterial channels feeding into the deep aquifer were blocked. Years of severe drought, compounded by shifting silt and heavy suburban construction compaction, had constricted the primary subterranean outflow passages. As the massive lakebed collapsed, 4 billion gallons of water slammed into a literal dead end deep beneath the surface. Water under extreme pressure always finds the path of least resistance. It does not wait. It destroys. Instead of gently filtering thousands of feet downward into the deep aquifer, the trapped deluge turned sideways. Trapped within a narrow, horizontal layer of fragile limestone just 200 feet below the surface, the water acted like a massive hydraulic ram. The pressure spiked exponentially, expanding through pre-existing microfractures in the rock, tearing open ancient fault lines, and blowing out subterranean cavern walls like dynamite. 3 miles south of the lakebed, beneath a sprawling suburban residential corridor, home to thousands of families, the earth began to rumble. It started as a low, sub-audible vibration, a deep, mechanical hum that rattled windows and set off barking dogs at 3 in the morning. Residents reported feeling their entire homes shudder on their foundations, as if a heavy freight train were passing directly underneath their living rooms. Then, the ground burst. The pressurized underground torrent, seeking an exit from its rock-bound prison, forced its way upward through a series of weak, shallow limestone caps. In a matter of minutes, the displaced water of the vanished lake erupted back onto the surface, miles away from where it had started. But it didn't return as a peaceful lake. It returned as a violent, silt-laden geyser, erupting through suburban streets, tearing up asphalt, and blasting through the concrete foundations of commercial strip malls. In low-lying residential neighborhoods, storm drains began working in reverse, spouting geysers of brown, churning water 5 feet into the air. Water poured over curbs, spilling into garages, living rooms, and electrical substations. Major multi-lane thoroughfares cracked like brittle peanut, brittle as the pressurized water washed away the supporting soil beneath the pavement, causing entire sections of roadway to sink into rushing, muddy rivers. By midday, the true scope of the disaster became undeniable. The water hadn't safely recharged the region's drinking supply. It had bypass routed itself through the upper soil layers, destroying critical municipal infrastructure on its way out. The localized flooding was catastrophic, but the secondary effect was far more insidious. As the pressurized torrent carved its violent new path through the shallow earth, it breached multiple municipal sewer mains and industrial runoff basins, carrying millions of gallons of untreated wastewater directly into the surrounding shallow well fields. Simultaneously, the sheer force of the underground eruption ruptured three major freshwater distribution trunks, the massive pressurized water pipes that supply clean, treated drinking water to over 400,000 residents across the county. Within 12 hours, clean water stopped flowing from municipal taps. What did come out was a foul, discolored slurry of mud and sand, accompanied by a sputtering hiss of compromised air pressure. As emergency response teams rushed to sandbag flooded neighborhoods and barricade collapsed roadways, municipal water engineers stood over control monitors in disbelief. The lake was gone, the surface roads were ruined, and the primary drinking supply for nearly 500,000 people had been rendered completely unusable in a single terrifying night. How could a landscape that looked so solid on the surface conceal a geological trapdoor capable of swallowing an entire body of water in the dark? The machine beneath the mud. To make sense of how billions of gallons of water can vanish without warning, you have to strip away the lush green turf, the suburban asphalt, and the pine forests of northern Florida. If you could peel back that top layer of topsoil like a carpet, you wouldn't find solid, unyielding bedrock underneath. You would find something that looks far more like a colossal, waterlogged slab of Swiss cheese. This is the hidden world of Karst geology, a subterranean landscape sculpted over millions of years by the quiet, relentless chemistry of water. Florida's foundation was built during ancient geological epochs, when the entire peninsula was submerged beneath a warm, shallow sea. Over millions of years, the shells and skeletons of countless marine organisms, corals, mollusks, and microscopic plankton accumulated on the ocean floor, compressing into massive layers of calcium carbonate. This formed the immense sheets of limestone that today stretch hundreds of feet deep beneath the state. When the oceans receded and the Florida platform rose above sea level, rain began to fall upon this newly exposed rock. Rainwater, as it falls through the atmosphere and trickles through decaying leaf litter in soil, absorbs carbon dioxide, transforming it into a mild carbonic acid. While this acid is completely harmless to human skin, to limestone, it is a slow-motion solvent. Over tens of thousands of years, slightly acidic groundwater seeps into microscopic cracks in the rock, dissolving the calcium carbonate and slowly widening small fissures into winding pipes, vast cavernous halls, and interconnected underground rivers. This vast honeycombed underground network holds one of the largest and most productive freshwater systems on the planet, the Floridan Aquifer. Spanning over 100,000 square miles beneath Florida and parts of Georgia, Alabama, and South Carolina, this massive subterranean reservoir holds trillions of gallons of pristine, fresh water. In a stable environment, the water filling these underground caves creates an upward hydrostatic pressure, acting like a hydraulic jack that supports the immense weight of the rock, soil, and human infrastructure sitting above it. It is a delicate balance of fluid pressure and solid rock, and nowhere is that balance more volatile than at Lake Jackson. Long before European settlers built paved roads and concrete homes around its shores, the indigenous Appalachian people lived alongside this unpredictable body of water. They recognized a fundamental truth about the landscape that modern suburban developers would later overlook. They gave the lake a name that captured its supernatural habit, Oki-Heepki. In the Appalachian language, it translates directly to disappearing waters. The Appalachian understood that the lake was not a permanent fixture of the landscape, but a temporary guest. For centuries, native oral histories recorded instances of the lake's water suddenly dropping out of sight, leaving behind vast plains of dry marshland, where hunters could walk across the muddy bed to harvest trapped fish. They knew that the lake had a pulse, an erratic, unpredictable rhythm dictated by the sky above and the dark caverns beneath. At the heart of Lake Jackson's disappearing act is a specific geological feature known as the Porter Hole Sink. Located in the southern basin of the lake, the Porter Hole is not merely a depression in the mud. It is a massive vertical funnel lined with jagged limestone that leads directly into the throat of the upper Floridan aquifer. Under typical conditions, you wouldn't even know the sinkhole was there. Over years of normal rainfall, dead leaves, aquatic plants, clay, and thick organic mud wash into the lowest points of the lake bed. This material acts as a natural rubber stopper, packing tightly into the throat of the sinkhole. Supported by the high water level of a full lake and the upward pressure of the aquifer below, this organic plug holds back billions of gallons of water, allowing a vibrant lake ecosystem to thrive above it. However, when prolonged droughts strike northern Florida, the delicate hydrostatic equilibrium shatters. As dry weather persists, two things happen simultaneously. First, the surface water level of the lake drops due to evaporation, reducing the downward weight pushing against the sinkhole. Second, as regional water tables fall, the water level within the underground aquifer drops as well. This causes the upward pressure supporting the bottom of the organic plug to evaporate. Without that upward support, the organic plug begins to dry out, crack, and lose its structural integrity. The immense weight of whatever surface water remains suddenly becomes too heavy for the weakened plug to bear. Then comes the collapse. The plug gives way with startling suddenness. Millions of tons of mud, silt, and debris are sucked downward into the subterranean cavern, opening a massive, unobstructed drain directly into the earth. The lake transforms into a giant funnel. Up to 4 billion gallons of water can drain out in a matter of days or even hours, leaving behind a desolate, alien landscape of exposed lake bed. When the drain opens, the immediate ecological impact is swift and dramatic. The sudden removal of millions of tons of water transforms a thriving aquatic ecosystem into an open-air graveyard within hours. Millions of fish, bass, bluegill, crappie, and catfish are drawn toward the swirling vortex of the sinkhole or left stranded in shallow, shrinking pools across thousands of acres of drying mud. The sound of a lake draining is something those who witness it never forget. It isn't just the rushing sound of water. It is a deep, resonant gurgle that echoes out of the earth itself, accompanied by the sharp cracks of collapsing mud banks and the frantic splashing of trapped aquatic life. Opportunistic predators, herons, egrets, vultures, and alligators, converge on the exposed basin by the thousands, feasting on the exposed marine life in a frantic feeding frenzy. In historical times, this dramatic draining was actually a vital ecological reset button. The exposure of the lake bed to air and sunlight allowed decades of accumulated organic muck to dry out, decompose, and compact. When tropical rains eventually returned, plugging the sinkhole with fresh sediment and refilling the basin, the lake emerged clearer, healthier, and far more biologically productive than before. It was a perfect, self-cleaning, natural engine. But that natural cycle evolved over thousands of years in an untouched wilderness. It was never designed to operate beneath a modern metropolis of 400,000 people, relying on stable ground, paved highways, and clean municipal water lines. What happens when this ancient geological trapdoor opens not in an empty wilderness, but directly beneath the fragile water infrastructure of a booming modern city? The Cascading Crisis. 400,000 residents domino effect. When an ancient geological system crashes headfirst into a modern urban grid, the fallout doesn't stay confined to the banks of an empty lake. It spreads like an invisible ink stain through the unseen networks that keep a city alive. What began as a startling natural spectacle at sunrise rapidly transforms into a sprawling, multi-tiered infrastructure failure, a slow-motion domino effect that tests every layer of regional disaster response. By 48 hours after the sudden breach, the initial curiosity and viral social media posts give way to a cold, creeping anxiety across the county. The first system to buckle is the municipal water network itself. When the displaced deluge tore through the upper rock strata, it didn't just flood surface streets. The violent shifting of the subterranean limestone sheared through major high-pressure drinking water mains like twigs. At the central water treatment facility, telemetry boards light up with frantic red warnings. Mainline pressure across 3 major distribution zones drops from a steady 60 pounds per square inch to a sluggish, dangerous 0. In homes, school cafeterias, and hospital wards across the city, faucets begin to cough and sputter. Instead of clear, pressurized water, sinks pour out a dark, tea-colored liquid laced with fine sand and organic silt from the disturbed cavern walls. Public health authorities issue a blanket, emergency boil water advisory for over 400,000 residents. But boiling water requires power and a working plumbing system to begin with. And as pressure drops to 0 in fire hydrants across a 70-square-mile radius, emergency management directors realize a far more terrifying truth. The city has lost its primary fire suppression capacity. A single major structural fire could now consume entire suburban blocks uninterrupted. Within 72 hours, the crisis deepens from an operational headache into a full-scale public health emergency. Grocery store shelves across 3 counties are wiped clean of bottled water in a matter of hours. Long, tense lines of idling vehicles stretch for blocks outside suburban distribution centers as the National Guard sets up emergency water rationing stations. Each household is allotted just 2 cases of bottled water per day, barely enough to cover basic drinking and sanitation needs in the oppressive 90-degree Florida heat. Hospitals are forced to roll in massive diesel-powered mobile water purification trailers to keep dialyzer machines running and surgical units sterile. Meanwhile, deep beneath the ground, a secondary, far more dangerous chemical process begins to unfold within the Floridan aquifer itself. Under normal conditions, the immense freshwater volume inside the deep limestone caverns maintains a strong outward hydraulic barrier against the surrounding salt ocean. Florida is a peninsula surrounded on 3 sides by saltwater, and the only thing keeping the sea from intruding into the state's drinking supply is the sheer pressure of fresh water pushing back from inland. When the lake drained so violently, it didn't just empty a surface basin, it created a sudden, localized pressure vacuum in the underlying aquifer layers. With the upward freshwater pressure severely depleted by drought and the sudden drainage shock, the delicate interface between fresh groundwater and deep saltwater shifts. Saltwater from the Gulf Coast, lurking deep beneath the coastal margins, begins to migrate inland, drawn toward the low-pressure pocket like air rushing into an empty chamber. Within 5 days of the breach, routine water samples from 6 deep municipal supply wells that pump drinking water to over 100,000 homes, detect a dramatic spike in sodium and chloride levels. The saltwater wedge has arrived. Once an underground limestone well field becomes contaminated with saltwater, it cannot simply be flushed out with a garden hose. The dense salt brine settles into the tiny porous pockets of the rock matrix, rendering the well field completely unusable for months, or even years. Without multi-million-dollar reverse osmosis desalination infrastructure that the regional utility simply does not possess. Virtually overnight, 25% of the region's long-term drinking water production capacity is rendered completely toxic. As civil engineers race to seal off the contaminated wells and reroute supply lines, the crisis claims its next victim, the agricultural economy that forms the backbone of the surrounding rural districts. With municipal wells failing and groundwater tables plummeting to historic lows, state environmental regulators issue an emergency moratorium on all agricultural water withdrawals across the regional watershed. Thousands of acres of commercial tomato, squash, and citrus farms are ordered to shut off their irrigation pivots immediately to prevent total aquifer collapse. Under the blazing summer sun, millions of dollars worth of unharvested crops begin to wither in the fields. Farm workers are laid off by the thousands, local packing houses grind to a halt, and supply chains across the southeastern United States feel the sudden shockwave of missing produce shipments. By week 2, the disaster shifts from a fluid crisis to a structural one. When you remove billions of gallons of water from an underground karst system, you don't just remove liquid, you remove the hydraulic cushion supporting the rock ceiling above it. The subterranean caverns, now emptied of their pressurized fluid, can no longer support the immense dead weight of the heavy clay topsoil and human construction above them. The earth begins to yield. Across the county, a wave of secondary sinkholes begins to open like landmines in a slow-motion battlefield. In suburban housing developments, homeowners wake up to find hairline cracks running up their drywall, doors jamming in their frames, and concrete driveways tilting at unnatural angles. On Interstate 80, a vital 4-lane shipping artery carrying long-haul freight through the region, a 12-foot-wide section of the outer lane suddenly caves in, swallowing the rear tires of a commercial semi-truck and forcing the immediate closure of the highway. State troopers scramble to set up emergency detours, sending heavy freight traffic pouring onto narrow 2-lane rural roads that were never designed to handle such loads, grinding regional logistics to an agonizing crawl. The real estate market across the metropolitan area freezes instantly. Insurance companies, already reeling from statewide climate exposure, issue immediate moratoriums on writing new property policies within a 10-mile radius of the lake bed. Home sales fall through, property values plunge, and local banks face a wave of commercial loan defaults as businesses find themselves unable to operate without guaranteed running water or structural site safety. By day 21, the crisis has evolved into a stark lesson in modern vulnerability. The city is no longer dealing with a single headline-grabbing event, but a chronic interlocking disaster that touches every facet of daily life. Emergency water tankers line the highways, National Guard tents dot public parks, construction crews work around the clock to shore up sinking roadbeds, and regional planners scramble to secure billions of dollars in emergency federal relief. 400,000 residents find themselves living through a reality that felt unimaginable just 3 weeks earlier. A high-tech, modern American community brought to its knees not by a violent hurricane, a sudden earthquake, or a fiery explosion, but by the silent, relentless gravity of an ancient underground drainage pipe that simply did what it was designed to do. As the dust settles over the cracked mud and fractured highways, a crucial question remains. Can human engineering tame a landscape that is constantly dissolving beneath our feet? Or are we simply temporary guests on a fragile rock crust? The tipping point: engineering, survival, and the future. When the immediate dust settles and the emergency water tankers finally roll out of the city, they leave behind a landscape permanently transformed. The crisis does not end with a dramatic ribbon cutting or a single moment of triumph. Instead, it transitions into a quiet, grueling era of structural reconstruction, scientific reevaluation, and long-term human adaptation. To survive atop a foundation as volatile as Florida's Karst platform, civil engineers and hydrogeologists are forced to completely rewrite the playbook for modern infrastructure. In the months following the collapse, the immediate focus turns to stabilizing the breached earth and restoring the region's drinking water matrix. But patching a subterranean failure is nothing like repairing a cracked bridge or a damaged dam. You cannot simply pour concrete down a black hole into an underground river system and expect it to stay put. Engineers deploy sophisticated geophysical mapping teams across the entire basin. Using ground-penetrating radar, high-resolution electrical resistivity tomography, and seismic reflection imaging, scientists sweep the terrain to create a real-time, three-dimensional blueprint of the honeycombed limestone below. They track the hidden fractures, mapping every hollow chamber and underground water pathway beneath the city. To trace where the water is moving, hydrologists utilize non-toxic fluorescent dye tracing. By injecting bright green fluorescent dye directly into active sinkhole throats, researchers monitor regional well fields and coastal spring outlets, uncovering precisely how fast groundwater travels through the subterranean maze. What they discover is humbling. Underground water currents do not creep along at inches per day, like standard sand-filtered aquifers. Within the wide limestone conduits of a karst system, water moves at speeds of several miles per day, meaning a single point of contamination can infiltrate an entire municipal well field in less than 48 hours. To protect the remaining clean water supply, water utilities pivot toward advanced, resilient engineering strategies. Instead of relying on traditional shallow groundwater wells that are extremely vulnerable to surface runoff and sinkhole breaches, the region invests in deep well injection and managed aquifer recharge systems. These high-tech facilities capture excess stormwater runoff during heavy rainfall, purify it through multi-stage filtration systems, and pump it deep into protected, confined limestone strata hundreds of feet below the surface. This creates an underground freshwater cushion, a strategic hydrostatic reserve that can be tapped during severe droughts to maintain positive pressure and hold off the advance of saltwater intrusion. Simultaneously, municipal planners implement a revolutionary overhaul of local building codes and land use zoning laws. Heavy commercial developments, highway corridors, and dense residential subdivisions are banned from building directly over high-risk karst zones or known sinkhole corridors. Advanced satellite radar monitoring, known as interferometric synthetic aperture radar, or INSAR, is deployed statewide to measure millimeter-scale ground movements from orbit. By detecting subtle land subsidence before a catastrophic collapse occurs, emergency management teams can evacuate buildings, reroute traffic, and inject specialized expanding polyurethane foams or compaction grouting to reinforce fragile rock caverns long before the ground gives way. Yet, despite all the cutting-edge technology, ground-penetrating radar, and orbital satellite monitoring, the ultimate lesson of the vanishing lake is not one of human mastery over nature. It is a lesson in radical humility. For centuries, modern civilization has operated under the comfortable illusion that the earth beneath our feet is a static, immovable stage. We build concrete highways, glass skyscrapers, and sprawling suburban neighborhoods with the quiet assumption that the ground will hold firm indefinitely. But in the unique, water-sculpted geography of Florida, the land is not a static stage. It is a living, breathing, dissolving organism. The limestone crust beneath our feet is continuously being shaped by the quiet chemistry of falling rain, the slow ebb and flow of subterranean rivers, and the immense hydrostatic pressures of the Floridan aquifer. It is a dynamic architecture that operates on its own ancient schedule, unconcerned with property lines, city budgets, or human convenience. When Lake Jackson drained, it was not a freak anomaly or a broken machine. It was simply a reminder of the natural engine that has been running quietly in the dark for thousands of years. The sinkholes will plug again as organic debris settles into the mud. The tropical rains will return, filling the dry, cracked basin back up to its lush, mirror-like surface. Fish will spawn, water lilies will bloom, and speedboats will eventually return to slice across the water. The lake will come back, just as it always has for centuries. But for the 400,000 residents living along its shores, the memory of the night the water vanished will linger forever. They now understand that the solid ground beneath their homes is part of a fragile, interconnected web, a hidden world of underground rivers and hollow stone where a single shift in pressure can erase an entire lake in the dark. We do not own the landscape, we merely borrow it from the cavernous depths below. Resurrecting Okiheepki, restoration, policy, and the path ahead. When the waters inevitably recede and the mud bakes under the southern sun, the race against time shifts from emergency response to long-term stewardship. Today, the management of Lake Jackson is no longer viewed as a battle against an unpredictable geological anomaly, but as a masterclass in living alongside an active ecosystem. State agencies, local conservation groups, and environmental engineers have coalesced around a unified mission to protect the delicate balance of northern Florida's most famous disappearing act. At the forefront of these efforts is the Lake Jackson Aquatic Preserve, managed by the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. Rather than attempting to block or permanently seal the Porter Hole sink, an engineering mistake attempted in past decades that severely disrupted the lake's natural ecology, modern policy focuses on working directly with the Karst system. State initiatives have prioritized large-scale muck removal and basin restoration during dry-down events. When the lake bed is fully exposed, heavy machinery moves in to scrape away decades of built-up urban runoff, invasive plant debris, and excess leaf litter. By removing thousands of tons of dense muck before the lake refills, workers prevent organic pollution from flushing directly down into the Floridan aquifer when the drain opens. Simultaneously, local governments have funded expansive regional stormwater treatment facilities and artificial wetlands. These filtration basins catch suburban runoff, trapping heavy metals, fertilizers, and sediments before the water ever reaches the lake's surface basin. To monitor the subterranean activity in real time, state geologists have installed pressure sensors, water quality monitors, and acoustic flow meters deep within the throat of the sinkhole itself. This continuous telemetry feed provides immediate early warnings to municipal utility directors whenever underground pressure drops, allowing water managers to adjust local pumping schedules before a sudden drainage event impacts regional well fields. Today, Lake Jackson stands as a powerful symbol of modern ecological resilience and a living laboratory for hydrogeologists around the globe, studying how urban communities can safely coexist with volatile karst landscapes. Through strict land use zoning, public education, and aggressive conservation policy, Northern Florida is ensuring that when Okeechobee inevitably drains again, the land beneath our feet remains secure, and the pristine waters feeding our future stay protected for generations to come. If you enjoyed exploring the hidden mechanics beneath our Earth, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss our next deep dive.